Climate finance refers to funding that is allocated to finance projects that are aiming to increase mitigation action or projects to enhance adaptation capacity and resilience. In terms of a conceptual definition of what climate finance is, there is none. There is not an agreed definition of what climate finance is within the UN framework on climate change convention, but there is a general understanding that projects that aim to increase mitigation activity globally and adaptation capacity and capacity building and transfer of technology in the context of climate action. That's what we mean when we speak about climate finance. So the discussions on climate finance have always been part of the heart, of the core of the UN convention. Even since the beginning, there was a recognition that climate finance required support because, first of all, there is this recognition that the co-benefits of climate action are linked to increase economic benefits. Overall, when countries work together, there is a possibility to make sure that climate action results in greater economic benefit. But then there is the other recognition, which is that in order to implement the obligations and the agreements within the UN Convention on Climate Change, within the different agreements that countries have agreed for the past 30 years, there needs to be funding. Part of the heart of the convention, the part of the spirit of the convention is equity and the importance of common but differentiated responsibilities and capacities in responding to the climate crisis. What that means is that even though the UN Climate Change Convention, even though the UNFCCC it brings together so many countries, not all countries come with the same capacity and with the same responsibility to respond to the climate crisis. Some countries who are least responsible to the climate crisis are also those who are feeling the worst impacts of climate change. And these countries, least responsible and with least capacity, in order for them to implement the activities and the actions agreed to stop global warming from happening, that requires support, that requires funding. And so throughout the 30 years of the convention, there is this understanding that for many countries around the world, particularly those who are least developed, who are more vulnerable to the climate crisis, climate finance flows need to be provided to them in order for them to really participate in this process and implement the objectives of the convention. So that is where that comes from, and that has evolved towards what we call today the 100 billion commitment, which is at the heart of the Paris Agreement. So within the UNFCCC, there's what we call the financial institutions of the convention, which means that we have been able to create different political bodies to tackle and discuss financial matters and the distribution of climate finance flows. from an operational level, an example that I could give you is within the UN, we have the Standing Committee of Finance, which assess, the information on climate finance flows and provides an overview on how these climate finance flows are going from developed to developing countries, but also sectoral, which sectors are being funded. Is it energy? Is it, technology? And which regions are receiving more funds? And it allows for us to have a bigger picture when it comes to how climate finance flows are going from one place to the other. We also have, operationally speaking, multilateral funds. So within the UN, there have been a couple of discussions about the creation of funds to really use these multilateral funds as tools to provide funding for specific projects on adaptation and mitigation. Maybe I'll give you two examples. The Adaptation Fund is one of them, which was created during the Kyoto Protocol and is one of the funds with a great record when it comes to financing adaptation projects. And it is not a big fund. It is really a fund that the developing countries cherish and protect a lot. Then another fund is the Green Climate Fund, which was a fund that came as a result of many negotiations since Copenhagen. And it was a fund that aimed to allow for the implementation of the Paris Agreement and greater climate ambition globally, and also to provide an opportunity for the developing countries to participate in the governing elements of these multilateral funds at the same level as the developed countries who regularly are in the board of these funds as board directors and shareholders, because they are the one who fund them. So the Green Climate Fund is also a result of these negotiations. So politically speaking, what is it that has been achieved? Part of it is the recognition that climate finance is urgent. What I mean by that is that, in order for the long-term goals of the convention to be implemented across all regions and across all countries, much more climate finance is needed to close the gap, the adaptation gap, the mitigation gap, and the support gap. And the other part of it is a political recognition that the current targets that we have right now when it comes to climate finance don't match the needs of the developing countries. So, for example, we talk a lot about the 100 billion goal. The 100 billion goal is a commitment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that when the developed countries provide 100 billion per year, that actually helps fill all the needs that are out there. Even when it comes to adaptation needs go beyond 100 billion a year. We're talking about 150 billion up in 2030 at the very least, and in 2050, more than 500 billion a year. So that is politically part of the reason why climate finance is important, because of the recognition that climate action, climate ambition requires the proper amount of support. And politically speaking, climate finance remains one of those topics that is everywhere. Without a climate finance deal in the UN negotiations, there is hardly a deal on the other issues that are being discussed, because as I said earlier, ambition requires support. So currently where we are, the response that I would give is we're 5-6 years after the Paris Agreement. In Paris, there was the recognition that the 100 billion would be met in 2020, and from 2020 to 2025, the developed countries would provide the 100 billion annually, and then in 2025 there will be a discussion about a new financial goal globally. And so at the current process, as we move towards COP26, there are a couple of things on the agenda. The first one is we need to assess if the 100 billion has been met, meaning that at the COP26, it's important for the developed countries to really confirm that the funds have been allocated through the level of commitment that they have set in Paris. That is the first one. The second one is we're also looking at the new post-2020 activities on climate finance, meaning that we need to design how is it that we're going to discuss climate finance issues from 2020 up until 2025, and discuss also how to engage the different bodies of the convention, but also the different political actors. So what is the role of ministers when it comes to climate finance? What is the role of countries? How is the UN going to be involved in these discussions to make sure that the 100 billion is met annually, and to also discuss and prepare the new goal that is going to be negotiated for 2025. That is the third thing. At the moment, we need to still agree on a process on a new climate finance goal that hasn't yet been the case, and that requires an understanding from all countries that the process needs to learn from previous experiences and also be science focused. So really take into consideration the needs of the developing countries, which is completely different to how the 100 billion was decided. The 100 billion was a number that was proposed back in Copenhagen, but it didn't. When that number was put forward, it didn't come with any political or science-based analysis. And part of the criticism of the 100 billion is that it didn't represent the needs of the developing countries. Now, when we're going to talk about the new goal, the new post-2025 goal, that there is an opportunity here to properly engage the developing countries, so to make sure that their needs assessed by technical analysis, science, are included in the process when agreeing a new goal. So I think, let's go back to the three things that I just mentioned. The first one is the 100 billion. We haven't had a COP. We haven't had a COP for, 19 months. And there needs to be a true recognition that the 100 billion has been met. That is the global commitment. It is a commitment that is there since 2019. It is a commitment that was reaffirmed in 2016, and we were not able to reconfirm that commitment in 2020. So now we're in 2021, at COP26, there is going to be a big question mark around the 100 billion. Has it been met? And are countries willing to make, the developed countries I'm speaking, to make all possible efforts to meet that 100 billion and to ensure that 100 billion mark gets met every year up until 2025. So that is the first thing. The second one is without finance, there won't be much confidence on the other things. So really the key issue is if the 100 billion gets sorted out, then we need to speak about how to continue building momentum on climate finance across all the other issues where climate finance is being discussed. Part of it is the discussions on adaptation financing, which is crucially important to operationalize Article 7 of the Paris Agreement on adaptation, to really land the discussions around the global goal on adaptation, but also because the adaptation fund, the future of the adaptation fund, depends on the conclusion of the negotiations on Article 6. Part of my second point is also because finance is linked to other processes. So, the discussions on the global stocktake that are going to begin and are beginning right now, but are going to really get into the nitty-gritty at COP26 will require discussions on finance. The discussions about the second periodic review will open up opportunities to discuss about finance. And so, because finance is really everywhere in so many of these big, important political negotiations at COP26, really there needs to be confidence that countries will come together to think about a finance package for COP26. And finally, a big part of this discussion is issues that have not necessarily had the political attention that other issues have. And part of it is loss and damage finance. And when we speak about loss and damage finance, I said earlier, there is not a proper definition about climate finance. When it comes to loss and damage finance, it has been trickier, to come to an agreement on what is it that we want to do politically on this issue. But there is an emerging, many voices from the developing countries that are saying that at COP26, the finance package needs to include loss and damage finance. And so if you want me to summarize the three things, meeting the 100 billion, confidence that finance will advance across all key issues, and sorting out the loss and damage finance piece. So I think I would say that climate finance is at the heart of the negotiation of the Paris Agreement. It is at the heart of discussions of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And climate finance is also a key component for the future of the future of the climate regime. And so really, we're already discussing about implementation. We're talking about 1.5. We're talking about the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. When we talk about that, everything that will happen from now on will require a greater recognition of the need to scale up financial support, both climate finance at the domestic level, and transitioning, financing fossil fuels towards financing renewable energy, adaptation capacity within at the domestic level, and then internationally. And internationally, that means, first of all, of course, the 100 billion, but it goes beyond the 100 billion. It's also, international investments. It's also solidarity agreements. It's also making sure that COVID-19 spending, the post-recovery, it's aligned with the Paris goals. So the climate finance, the climate finance debate will not just stay at the UN level. It also goes outside, and more as we talk about the implementation of the Paris Agreement, the importance for anyone that is following the negotiation closely is to connect the dots between what's happening outside of the UNFCCC regime and inside of it.